Eric, thank you, and thanks everyone for joining us today for this webinar in first one of 2014. As Eric mentioned, quick background on me. I'm an ATP flight instructor and vice president here at Sporty's Academy, which is the educational division of Sporty's Pilot Shop. Primary responsibilities here, creating and overseeing our app development. Sporty's has over 30 apps now and a wide variety of training products and flight computers, etc. Also oversee our video production for our training courses, all the different video programs available on DVD format and now very popular as iPad apps as well in the training realm. And as Eric mentioned, also editor at a very popular website called iPadPilotNews.com. And a very good website to jot down, especially for those new to getting an iPad and flying with it. We have a lot of resources here, nearly 300 articles written over the last couple years, and 100% free to you and all pilots out there. How to get started with the iPad, things once you learn how to use it, advanced topics. We do accessory and app reviews and keep you up to date with the latest app updates as they become available. We also send out all this content every 2 weeks in a newsletter format delivered to your inbox. There's no ads, there's no spamming, it's all just great content on flying with the iPad. So highly recommend you check that site out at iPadPilotNews.com. But one other thing I'll point out on that site, as Eric mentioned, this is a 101 webinar, so we're talking about basic iPad concepts here, apps, and getting started. For those of you that are looking for something a little more in-depth in terms of video training and webinars, we do have an advanced webinar recording for the iPad that we recorded back in, I believe, October or November of last year, so pretty current still, about an hour and 10-minute presentation. So if you are looking, especially after this presentation, or want to learn more about the iPad and aviation, I would recommend checking that out under the webinars tab on iPadPilotNews.com. So a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. As Eric mentioned, and I'm sure you know by the fact that you're here, that the iPad is probably the most popular portable device that pilots have been integrating into their flight decks really since 2010 when it first came out. Pilots really grabbed hold of the iPad, and app developers came out, and accessory manufacturers really supported the iPad well for pilots to use it in the airplane. So as far as the presentation, we're going to talk about how to get started with it and a little bit of basic info if you are thinking about buying an iPad still, because there are a lot of different versions out there and different specifications. Going to talk about how you can use it on the ground for things like flight planning, document management, organization, flight training, a lot of great apps out there. Going to spend a lot of time, and probably the majority of the time, talking about how to use it as a flight deck tool. The biggest benefit, as the image shows here, is things like sectionals and approach charts, and now free in-flight weather can all be displayed on your iPad in the cockpit. We're going to look at probably what I would consider, and most out there would consider, aviation's top app, which is ForeFlight, which is an app that supplies all these charting tools and weather tools to you in one convenient app on your iPad. So we're going to look at some basic tips in that application. We're going to look at accessories, things to support your iPad, GPS, mounting, power backups, that kind of thing. And we're going to wrap up with a pre-flight checklist, how to get your iPad ready for every single flight. So let's start off. The iPad isn't the first tablet computer to hit aviation. It's the first one, I think, to become very popular and to be well supported. But tablet computers in the cockpit date back probably late 90s, early 2000s. And we've been experimenting with them here at Sporty's back with in the early 2000s with Fujitsu tablets. They were Windows-based computers. You had to use DVDs to load software on them. But even as Windows computers are today, they weren't very reliable. They had poor battery life. They were expensive. They weren't easy to use. And for that reason, they never really took off in that format. And even though we tried to use them here and we promoted them, they never really became popular. Well, the iPad came along, obviously from Apple, without any intent of being an aviation tool, but it really hit all those feature points that pilots were looking for as a stable paper chart replacement and a device that could be reliably used time after time in the cockpit and last the entire flight also without having to rely on another power source. The first bullet point I have there, I think, is really one of the most important ones, and that's the stability of it and the ease of use of the iPad. We can turn it on. We have simple icons to use on the screen. We don't have to rely on typing in commands or searching throughout the device. It just works every time and works well. And I can say that with 100% certainty after having flown with it for 3+ years now, that it's there every time you need it. As long as you take the proper precautions and pre-flight steps, it's going to be there every time. And you can use this device to legitimately replace paper charts and paper navigation tools in the cockpit. It's high resolution, bright screen, obviously very important in the airplane to be able to see this data clearly without having to use too many shading devices or et cetera to block the sun from it. Good form factor, and this keeps getting better and better. The iPad is a fraction of the weight and size it was when it was first introduced in 2010. And now we have the iPad mini also, which we'll show here. That's even a better tool for those in tight cockpits that don't have a lot of room to mount it or hold it on their knee. Great battery life. Out of the box, the iPad, we're looking at 10 hours of battery life for internet surfing, reading books. When we start using it for aviation, we're looking more in the 4 to 6 hour range, but still long enough for the majority of our typical general aviation flights. And now with the wide availability of the main aviation apps out there is really what makes it a powerful tool. Apps like ForeFlight and those from Garmin, WingX, and then other supporting apps like Logbooks and flight computers that we'll talk about. And of course, once you get to your destination, the iPad's a fully functional computer. You can check email, you can surf the web, watch movies. So you're not just going to have it in your airplane and leave it there. You're going to get a lot more use out of it than just flying. And a great cost point. You can start out now buying an iPad for under $300 for some of the previous generation models. And even for the top of the line, the brand new iPad Air, you can get that starting out at $499. So great price point to get into this product, especially when you compare it to dedicated aviation portables that were available prior to the iPad's introduction. So first question, this is pertaining to those looking to purchase an iPad, is which model should I buy? The iPad Air is the full-size iPad, the one on the left there. That's the current generation 10-inch display. The iPad mini is the smaller one to the right. Both are very, very slim now. And the important thing to remember here is no matter which one you buy, they're all going to have similar battery life, same memory, same wireless connectivity options, whether you want to go with the Wi-Fi or add a Verizon or Sprint or AT&T option. But the main difference is going to be that size and weight. So it really depends on your cockpit size and how you plan on using it. And we'll show those mounting options later in the presentation. But my recommendation, if you are looking to get one, is to go to a store and hold them in your hand and look at them. If your eyes aren't as good anymore, you may want to consider the larger size iPad for that larger screen size to be able to better read the small text on charts and things. Both of them have the same screen resolution in terms of amount of pixels, so they're both very clear and easy to read. My preference now at this point is the iPad mini, just because of the smaller size and form factor to fit in a kneeboard in the airplane. But the other benefit of the iPad mini is you're also going to get that at a reduced price point, about $100 less than the full iPad Air. So like I said, go to a store, check them out, hold them in your hand and feel them. I think that's your best kind of starting point to see which one is best for you. So once you decide iPad Air full size or the iPad mini, the next thing to consider is the internal storage of the iPad. And unlike computers, desktop or laptop computers, you cannot upgrade the memory once you purchase it. So whatever you buy, you're pretty much stuck with as long as you own that device. And these are the four options here, 16, 32, 64 gigabytes. And then the iPad Air offers a 128 gigabyte option. So to put that in perspective, we're going to look at this from an aviation standpoint. If you were to download all the charts for the United States in the ForeFlight application, that would take about 8 gigabytes. Now, with that being said, Alaska alone is 2 gigabytes. So really the practical number there for the lower 48 states is about 6 gigabytes of data for all your VFR and IFR charts. If you want to add the high resolution terrain, that adds about another gigabyte. And now ForeFlight also offers charts for Canada, Mexico, and Caribbean, so that can take some more space also. So my consideration is a minimum would be the 32 gigabytes. Now the reason I say that is these charts are updated every 28 days on that Thursday at around 9 Zulu. And what happens is you can actually download the newer charts about a week in advance to store them on your iPad so that you can have them ready to go at that switchover point. And during that period there, you're going to have both the current charts and the next revision chart cycles on your iPad. So you could have easily 14 to 18 gigabytes of data during that transition period, which would obviously be more than the bare minimum of the 16 gigabytes. So for the extra $100, I think the 32 gigabyte version is well worth it. And plus consider you're going to have other media on here. You might have movies or music or other documents you want to store on the iPad. So give yourself some extra space there for the extra $100 when you make that initial investment. Next consideration, there are two options. You can get the Wi-Fi only model or the Wi-Fi plus LTE, which is the Verizon or AT&T connectivity to be able to get data anywhere you're traveling on the road. And the reason I show this image here is that if you're looking at two side by side, you can tell the model with the LTE or the wireless data by looking at the top rear of it, and you'll see that black bar at the top there, which is the antenna for that feature. Now, from pilots, we're more concerned with the fact that the Wi-Fi plus LTE model also includes a built-in GPS, and the benefits there are pretty clear from an aviation standpoint, and that this product can tell where it's at and show our position on moving maps on the charts and things and the applications we're using. As you'll see later on, that's not a necessity because you can always add a GPS accessory later on, but some like to have that GPS option built in as a foolproof, easy-to-use solution. And for that case, you would want to consider that model with the Verizon or AT&T wireless data option. Now, some important points to keep in mind there. Even if you buy that model, you don't ever have to activate that Verizon or AT&T service. So most pilots I know end up buying that model to get the GPS, but never have any intention of using or activating that wireless connection. And if you do go ahead and get that feature, I wouldn't count on being able to access that data in the air when you're flying. You know, maybe for the first 1,000 or 2,000 feet after takeoff or during landing, you might have limited connections. But really, once you get up at altitude, cell signals aren't meant to serve that part of the airspace. They're more for the areas close to the ground. So don't buy one of those LTE models thinking that you're going to get cell phone service or data service in the air, unless you're flying a helicopter or something low in a metropolitan area. A couple other things I'll point out. Since the iPad and the iPhone are pretty mature products now, we're about 5 generations in on the iPad. They have changed the connectors on the bottom of it, and this is what you use to plug the iPad into the wall or to a USB port to charge it. The first 3 generations of iPad used the 30-pin connector, which is shown there at the left. And then with the iPad 4, which came out last year, and the iPhone 5 that came out around the same time, they switched over to a new Lightning connector. And the reason I bring this up is that if you do need to buy replacement cables or charging accessories, make sure you do know which type you have, since you may just see the general term iPad charging cable or iPhone charging cable. You want to make sure you get the kind that's properly configured for your device. So anything created now from Apple, the iPad Air, the iPad Mini, the new iPhone 5, 5S, 5C, they all use that newer, smaller style Lightning connector. They run around $20 or $30 or so for a replacement charging cable. If you do have some older charging cables or older accessories that need the 30-pin cable and you have the newer style iPad, Apple does make an adapter that allows you to go from the 30-pin to the Lightning adapter. So that's an option if you want to go that route without changing out your cables, or maybe if you have something hardwired in your airplane or in your car that you want to use. So the iPad by itself is great. We can get on the internet, listen to music, but it's the apps that we can download that really make it a powerful aviation tool. And there's 2 places you can get apps for your iPad. The easiest way is to go directly on the device itself to the App Store icon. And there you can browse hundreds of thousands of apps literally to download, sorted by categories. And the great thing is there's a lot of free apps out there also. They're not all for sale. So you can get in right away and use a lot of the aviation apps for free. And all the main charting apps that are available, like ForeFlight and Garmin, offer free 30-day trials. So you can get in right away and start using some of these features without any initial investment. iTunes is also available. It's a computer-based program. A lot of people used it for music collections and sorting their movies. You can also buy apps directly from iTunes. And if you want, some people like browsing it preferably on their computer with their mouse. There's a setting on your iPad that you can turn on called automatic downloads. And if you were to download or purchase an app in iTunes, it would automatically be transferred to your iPad. So that's an option there if you'd prefer to browse that method. A term Apple uses is called universal apps. The iPhone came out first, available to consumers with a smaller screen, obviously, and then the iPad came out in 2010. Well, obviously, the larger screen of the iPad needs a different interface and different controls and buttons than an app created for an iPhone. So what Apple created was the universal app concept, and that you buy it one time, and you'll get a version formatted for both your iPhone and your iPad. It runs well, uniquely tailored to each excuse me, screen size. And for the same price, you don't have to buy one version for your iPhone, one version for your iPad. And you'll see that little plus sign in the price symbol there, which is a button in the App Store. That tells you that it is a universal app that works on both devices. Another feature that was new to the computer world, I would say, is that this concept of free app updates. You basically buy an app now once, and as long as the developer continues to support that app, they're going to provide you with free updates to that application. Things like new features, bug fixes, improvements to go along with different software updates that Apple provides. But you're going to want to keep up on that. And the way you do it is go to your App Store icon. If you see a little red number on it, like you do there, the number 6, that tells you that there are 6 application updates available for your apps currently installed on your iPad. And if you go to the App Store in the bottom right corner there, you'll see an Updates tab. And when you click on that, you'll see all the apps that are available for updating on your iPad. So I think it's worth paying attention to. Not necessarily on a daily basis, but from time to time, check it out. And you'll see a description of what's new for your apps there. Now, Apple released what's called iOS 7. That's the operating system version that runs the iPad. That came out last fall. There was a lot of media attention given to it since so much of the country now is using iPhones and iPads. One of the features that they added to that was the ability to do automatic updates to your apps. Let's say Sporty's as a developer, we release an update to one of our apps. When that becomes live, if you have this feature enabled, your iPad will automatically go in and download that update and install it behind the scenes, which is good for a lot of general use apps to keep them up to date. You may want to consider turning that off, though, for aviation. Certain apps require an internet connection right after an update to verify some things and download initial databases. So if you are using one of those apps, you may want to consider turning that off, just so you don't have any surprises when you get out to the airplane after an app updates. And realize you don't have internet connection, and that could make that application useless at that point until you were able to get back into a Wi-Fi connection to verify that update or download that first set of databases. But to get to that feature, it's in the main settings of the iPad, the little gear button. And then you'll scroll down on the left side of the screen to the iTunes and App Store option here on the left. And then under automatic download, you'll see the update section. And in this case, we have the switch selected to the off position. So something to consider if you want to manually control your app updates. There aren't a lot of physical controls on the iPad, but one I will bring your attention to is that side toggle switch that can be moved either up or down to configure one of 2 options. It can either be set to lock the rotation of the iPad, so that if you're holding it, let's say, with the screen vertical, and you rotate it, let's say you have a chart displayed on it, and you don't want that chart to rotate as you rotate the iPad, enabling that lock rotation will keep that orientation in place, which can be very useful if you have an approach chart on your kneeboard, and as you're flying around in turbulence or you accidentally knock the iPad, it won't cause your orientation to change on the screen. The other option is to use that side switch as a mute control to mute the speakers. More useful, in my opinion, on something like an iPhone, but if you are in meetings a lot or if you want to be able to have a way to quickly mute the device, that's the option there. But the point is you can go into that main settings app again and configure that to side switch to do one of the 2 options, either lock rotation or mute the screen or mute the speakers. So there's that settings I keep mentioning, that gear icon. And this is where you go in to control all the different functions of your iPad and settings and things. Turn on or off Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. You can set the screen to shut off after a certain amount of minutes of inactivity. You can view how much storage space you have available, free space remaining. And also things like set the time and date of the iPad, which is important to do, especially when traveling across time zones, because a lot of the aviation apps use your iPad's central time as a basis for flight planning and things like estimated time of arrival, departure, etc. So keep that up to date in your settings section. Now, if you have your iPad in front of you, there's a feature that allows you to see what apps you've recently had open. These are called apps that are not really running in the background, but apps that were in the background or running recently. But to do that, you double tap the home button on the right there, and it will bring up a display with a preview window and the icons of apps you've recently used. And what you can do here is access apps quickly in flight. So let's say that you have a checklist app and a navigation app. You can double tap that home button to quickly access that checklist app that you just previously had open, instead of having to search for the icon on the home screen or dig it out of a folder somewhere. This is also the way that you can shut down an app completely, which can be useful if an app is not running correctly, if something seems to act kind of funny or out of place. Once you have that preview window open after double tapping the home button, you can slide that window from the top or from the bottom to the top as the arrow is pointing, and it will shut down that app completely. And then next time you open the icon or tap the icon to open it, it will restart the application from scratch. So kind of a little shortcut if you want to restart an application to get a fresh start, just like you would with an application on a computer by using the X to close it down. One other new feature that Apple added with iOS 7 is called the control panel. This is a really handy feature, especially when it comes time to pre-flight your iPad. And the way you access this is swiping from the bottom of the iPad screen up about halfway or so. And you'll see that little gray bar up here that has a bunch of quick access buttons. Things like music controls, a great way to quickly change the screen brightness, as you see in the lower right there. And also ways to enable or disable Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, which can be handy when setting the iPad up for a flight. But as we all know, the iPad's not perfect. Nothing's perfect, really, as far as electronics go. There's always going to be some limitations we have to consider. And these are what I consider the main four limitations on the iPad: temperature, altitude, GPS interference, and potential screen glare. So the first one, I think this is really probably the biggest limitation, and this is the one that I've had happen to me the most in terms of a potential reason for the iPad becoming unresponsive if you're not careful, and that's temperature. Apple lists the temperature range as 32 degrees to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and if the iPad does get too hot, it has internal temperature sensors, the screen will shut off and you'll see that warning there as you see at the right. And the reason that does that is to protect the internal lithium-ion battery. They cannot overheat or they can have damage caused to them. So the iPad will stop operating at that point. Now from my experience, it's more likely to happen if you have direct sunlight hitting your iPad. Let's say you're flying up at altitude. And it might be cool in your cabin. It could even be easily below freezing outside. But with the iPad's black, dark screen and the way it's angled, if you have a low-wing aircraft and sun's coming in your side window and hitting that screen directly, it might only take 15 or 20 minutes or so for the iPad to reach this point. So pay close attention to where you're mounting it and how you're using it. Even more so if you have a case on your iPad, around the backside especially, that limits the amount of cooling, can make it even more susceptible to overheating. So things like using a RAM mount that will show a way to mount it to your yoke, or a suction cup to a side window so that the front screen is not facing the sun, are all great ways to prevent that. Or if you're in a high-wing aircraft and you don't regularly get sunlight shining in on your lap with a kneeboard, you're probably in pretty good shape there also. But something to keep in mind. Also, as you transition from paper to electronic charts in the past, you're probably used to, after landing, taking your kneeboard with your charts and stuffing it up on the glare shield between the front window at the FBO and then grabbing it back after your stop. Don't do that with your iPad. Same thing there, that exposes it to direct sunlight and will quickly overheat, especially on a hot summer day with closed doors and windows in your aircraft. The iPad will, you'll return to the aircraft and find the iPad overheated and unusable until it cools down. And that can take 15 or 20 minutes or so not an ideal situation. Next one is, this is a limitation from Apple. This one's never really got me in trouble. I've used it over longer flights at 13,000, 14,000 feet in Piper Aztecs, and never had the issue of the iPad causing any problems. The reason I say this one again has to do with cooling. At higher pressure altitudes, there's less air molecules to cool the device. So if you are in a situation with direct sunlight or warmer temperatures, it might accelerate the potential for overheating. But not really as much of an issue in my opinion, as long as you're keeping it out of the sunlight. And remember too that if you're in a pressurized aircraft, turboprop or a small jet, those cabin altitudes are much below 10,000, so you don't have to worry about that, even though you're up in the flight levels. And we'll put a note there for those that are flying in those kind of aircraft that the iPad has successfully passed the decompression testing that's required by the Advisory Circular 120-76B that's required for the large and heavy turbojets. And we've actually performed that test on several of our iPads here to demonstrate that ability for some different programs that I'll mention here shortly. So again, it shows the ruggedness of the product, that it can withstand these conditions. GPS interference is important to pay attention to, especially those that have the iPad models with the cellular data, that Verizon or AT&T. That's the condition that is most likely to interfere with the GPS in your panel mount avionics in your aircraft. And you may have heard that before too with your iPhone or an Android phone. If you don't shut it off and it's near a headset even, you'll hear kind of some interference noises, and it'll interfere with the noise canceling headset. Well, same thing with GPS and the GPS antenna. If your iPad, in some situations, gets too close to either one of those, it can cause a problem and limit or shut down your GPS's ability to make a clean connection with the satellites and get that information. This only happened to me once in a Bonanza, and once we figured out what the problem was, making sure that the airplane, or that the iPad was in that airplane mode that shut off the cellular data, took care of that problem right away. So as long as you follow the pre-flight steps that we'll talk about here at the end, you'll be in good shape on that one. And finally, screen glare. Again, this is unique to each setup and aircraft, but the iPad screen is a piece of glass, so it does basically act like a mirror in direct sunlight. And the way around this is to make sure that the iPad is either angled towards you or mounted in a way that it's not in a direct line of sight of the sun to prohibit you from seeing the screen. And we do offer some screen glare filters here at Sporty's that work pretty well to minimize that if you are in a low-wing aircraft or a bubble-type canopy, to really reduce that screen glare. Okay, now we're going to talk about some apps you can use on the ground. The first one here is not even an aviation app. It's called GoodReader. The purpose of this application is to organize and help you manage PDFs and documents, which the iPad's a great book viewer and book reader. And there's a lot of PDFs out there that can be very valuable to keep with you at all times. From a training standpoint, things like the Airplane Flying Handbook, the AIM, Instrument Flying Handbook, et cetera, that are all available free from the FAA's website for those studying. Garmin and Honeywell, other manufacturers, Cessna, make their manuals available as PDFs you can download for free from their website. And you can import these into an app like GoodReader to keep them all sorted, organized. You can bookmark pages for quick access. So a great tool to keep all that together. And this has great integration with things like Dropbox and other online server applications so that you can keep all your documents in sync also. For those using ForeFlight who might not need all the advanced features of GoodReader, I'll point out that also does some basic document management with its Documents feature. Again, you can organize and sort PDFs and keep them all accessible right on your iPad for simple and quick access to manuals and things. Next couple of apps, things that were once done either electronically with dedicated computers or pen and paper, but now have dedicated apps, like an E6B flight computer. We've taken Sporty's, we've taken our popular handheld flight computer and added all those functions and expanded them in an app version. And then my preference for a weight and balance computer, if you're looking for a dedicated version of that, is the Aviation W&B calculator. And as you can see there, it'll do your typical weight, arm, moment calculations, and then plot the positions on a CG graph, just like you would in the POH. So a great electronic tool to quickly perform weight and balance calculations. The Logbooks, another former paper product that made a great transition to the iPad. And you have a couple options there. I'd say our preference here is the Log 10 Pro app at the bottom for a great tool, very powerful tool to keep track of your flight times and manage all your different currency requirements, et cetera. Another option there is Logbook Pro for an iPad app. And training, pilots working towards a private certificate instrument rating. Sporty's has long developed very popular training programs. All of our courseware is now available as dedicated iPad apps to allow you to watch these videos and interact with the test prep programs on the go. And of course, the famous FAR-AIM book that we've all had for so long is also available as a dedicated app as well. A couple other ones I'll mention here. I call these for fun and social flying. First one's called Cloud Ahoy. This one's a really neat app that allows you to, when using the iPad with a GPS, it will record your flight path, and you can go back after you land and review that flight path in its mapping application. You can overlay it on top of charts or satellite data, but a great way to store your flights and review them afterwards. X-Plane's a neat one. It's basically a flight simulator for your iPad, so you can fly a whole wide range of aircraft from Cessnas to Boeings, and actually use the accelerometers in your iPad to control the flight simulator, just like you would with a joystick. And it has really neat graphics and displays. Social Flight is a free app that allows you to keep track of events going on around you. Let's say on a Saturday you're looking for something to fly to, maybe a pancake breakfast or a hot dog fly out. But you can open up this app and look on a map and see different events going on around you. Wide range of different things from air shows or EAA events, etc. But a good app to help you decide or determine a good place to fly if you're just looking for somewhere to go. And the last one I have up here, liveatc.net, allows you to tune into basically all the major control towers, approach control frequencies, centers, etc., and listen in. A great tool for those learning to communicate, but also pretty entertaining, especially at the busier airports, to hear what's going on there. Okay, so now we're going to transition to what's probably the most widely used feature of the iPad, and that's in the cockpit as an in-flight navigator, as a paper chart replacement. And the question that new iPad pilots always will have, and rightfully so, is the iPad a legal replacement for paper charts? And the answer is 100% yes. It is a legal replacement for Part 91 operations to replace your paper charts. Now, there are some regulations and advisory circulars and the legal considerations that we want to talk about. The first one is FAR 9121, which relates to portable electronic devices. And this goes for any piece of electronics you bring into the cockpit, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone or a Garmin GPS for that matter, that you need to make sure as the pilot in command that device does not cause interference with any of the avionics in your cockpit. And as we mentioned before, as long as you take the proper pre-flight procedures to shut off unnecessary wireless radios, you're going to be in good shape there. Okay, so here's what really matters, and this is where the guidance comes in that specifies that we are allowed to use the iPad and use it as a paper chart replacement. So the one that applies to the majority of pilots out there is Advisory Circular 91-78, and this applies to the Part 91 General Aviation Piston Operations. Now, I'll go over the details of that in a minute, but I do want to bring up that there is one other one that governs use of EFBs, or electronic flight bags, and that is the 120-76B, and this applies to the Part 91F turbojet operations, also aircraft over 12,500 pounds, as well as the commercial operations, Part 121 and Part 135. And just like those regulations are a lot more strict and in-depth for those operations, the rules governing iPad use are also more in-depth, and they do require specific approval to use the iPad for those operations. But for us Part 91 guys, flying the Cessnas and the Pipers, we don't need any official approval to use the iPad as a paper chart replacement. We're allowed to make that determination ourselves as the PIC. So I've got about 5 bullet points here, highlights of that advisory circular that I'll point out that are worth noting. And this AC is only about, it's not very long, maybe 9 or 10 pages. It's worth a good read. It's easy to understand. It's not one of the complicated, complex ones. So I would recommend checking that out on the FAA's website if you have time. So it considers the iPad and any tablet or computer that you bring in as a Class 1 electronic flight bag, EFB. You'll hear that term a lot in reference to the iPad and other tablets. It does say you must have the functional equivalent of paper reference material. So you need to have an application or software that displays the sectionals and the approach charts. And those are things like apps like ForeFlight, Garmin, and WingX Pro. It also says that the backup source is recommended, but very importantly, it points out that you don't have to have a backup source. In my opinion, I think you should, whether it's some basic paper printouts, maybe a second iPad, or in my case, what I use as my backup is an iPhone with a second version of ForeFlight installed on it. It has all the essential data and information if the iPad were to become unresponsive, which again in my like I said, 3 or 4 years of flying has only happened when it overheated, and it did come back in place once I got it out of the sun. So chances of needing a backup are very slim, but I still think it's worth taking one along. Of course, it mentions the 9121 reference of electronic interference testing. And they also have a good suggestion at the end there that says use first during an evaluation period with paper available. And I think that's a very important point, especially for those new to the iPad, is that you shouldn't just throw out your paper and start flying with the iPad right away. You should have the paper available still in case you do get in a situation where you need that information or something's not working right on the iPad until you feel comfortable with it. And then you can transition to a fully paperless cockpit. As I mentioned before, those flying the 12,500 pound aircraft or turbojets do need approval. If anybody out there is in that situation, we do offer an easy approval program for the iPad where we will walk you through all the different requirements with the FAA and your particular inspector to get that authorization. But there's full information on that program if you're interested on the Sporty's website. Okay, so as the advisory circular mentioned, we have to have an application that provides this data to make the iPad a good tool. And these are what I would consider the 3 main apps out there available today that provide the navigation data, the sectionals, the moving map displays, etc. And that is ForeFlight Mobile from ForeFlight, Garmin Pilot, obviously from Garmin, and then WingX Pro 7, which is a product of Hilton Software. But 3 great apps there that all provide all that information, and all of them start at under $100 a year. So great price points for all this data also. So I won't spend too much time then talking about what ForeFlight is, because a lot of us know already. But for those that don't, it's kind of your all-in-one resource as an aviation application. IFR, VFR charts, geo-reference, so you're going to see your airplane on the chart for the United States and Canada. And then just recently they added Mexico and Caribbean IFR charts. You're going to get flight planning, things like how winds are going to affect your flight and ground speed, etc. ADSB weather, which is a very helpful tool for providing free next-rad radar in the cockpit. Terrain and hazard advisor for things like nearby terrain and obstacles. Of course, airport information, fuel prices, and as I mentioned before, a document management feature. So let's go through a couple tips, especially for those getting started, to get you started off on the right foot. When you first download the application in your living room and you turn it on, you're going to see sectionals and charts right away. But these aren't really downloaded to your iPad. They're just displaying from an internet connection. So as you go through the app, you're going to see charts for the entire country loaded nearly instantaneously. The problem is, though, if you were to do the same thing in the airplane without downloading charts first, you would get out there and see that red warning box there that says, hey, you haven't downloaded your charts yet. Obviously not good if you were going to be using this as a resource. So the solution is, when you first get the application, or really for any of these that you use, is to go into your iPad app settings or your chart management feature and select the kind of charts you want to download. As you can see there, you can select VFR charts, IFR charts, etc. at the top half of the screen. And then the bottom half, you can go in and select individual states to download for your area. So you don't have to download the entire country or the entire eastern half if you don't want to. If you're just flying around a couple states, you can select those. And it'll also tell you how big in megabytes or gigabytes there, how much space that is going to take as far as storage goes on your iPad. Now, once you get your charts downloaded, you can go to the Maps section, which is located on the tab here at the bottom left. And up top here is your main overlay button where it says VFR and PyReps. And this is where you can select different layers, sectionals and route charts, etc. And then on the right side is where you can select overlays on top of those charts. That's where you can select your radar, TFRs, and a wide variety of weather features to display on your iPad. Here's another screenshot where we're showing a combination of weather radar and then fuel prices to help determine a good fuel stop, considering both fuel prices and the weather around. To enter a flight plan, you got a couple options. The quickest way, and I consider it a shortcut, is to use a search field up at the top here. And you can enter the routing in directly, starting with the airport, with the space, and then any VORs or intersections, and then the final airport identifier. And then once you get that in there, you press that search button there in the bottom right, and that will enter the flight plan and show your waypoints and legs on the moving map. The other option is to use the excuse me, route editor, and that is accessed by this 3-line white button up here in the middle top. And here you can enter in your airports and waypoints directly by tapping in that field, and it shows up more as a bubble icon type look. So another way to enter in your airports and waypoints. Now let's say you want to pick a route. ForeFlight does have some what's called route advisor functions that can help you determine the best route. So what you want to do first here is enter your destination and departure airport, and then press that routes button on the right side of the route editor. And it'll suggest different options. The first one will be an airway route. If you were flying VORs, it'll give you that option. The more useful feature, I think, is what's called the ATC cleared section here. And these were routes that were recently cleared by ATC and flown by aircraft in the system. Very helpful when flying in unfamiliar areas to see what ATC might issue you. And they're also sorted by altitude. So we can look at the 6,000 to 10,000 foot range to figure out a good option for that route of flight. All these apps also, including ForeFlight, offer the ability to show either track up or north up map centering. By default, it'll be in a north up situation. But to change that, you can press the gear button here, which will bring up the map settings located in the top left of the screen. And you'll see options for north up, track up centered, or track up forward. Now what'll happen though, a lot of times, you might push that track up forward button and the screen won't change and you'll think something's broken or something's not working right. Well, if that happens, it's most likely because you don't have the auto centering turned on. And the auto centering is enabled in the top right of the screen with that blue crosshair button. I'll go back there. The blue crosshair button right up there. So if for some reason you push that track up button and your map still remains oriented towards north, it's probably because the auto centering is turned off. So the quick solution is just to push that top right crosshair button. Another neat feature is what's called rubber band flight planning. So let's say we're flying along and we see some precipitation out in front of us, storm cells, etc. Of course, we could look around the map and kind of guess a vector heading around the weather. But what's even easier is you can take your hand and drag that route around the weather and release it, and it'll suggest VORs or airports, or not airports, but VORs or intersections nearby your position that you can change your route to. And this is really great because then you can tell air traffic control, hey, if I go to the Brickyard VOR and then direct destination, that'll keep me clear of the weather. It's easier for you because you know you're clear of the weather, and air traffic control loves you because you've got a great routing, provided there aren't other conflicts around that weather. And you can do that on the ground or in the air, but simply just grab the route and drag it to a new point, and the ForeFlight will adjust it accordingly. Another feature I really like is called Hazard Advisor. Now this requires the pro level subscription, but it will allow you to display terrain shading based on your relative GPS altitude. Yellow terrain within 100 to 1,000 feet of you, and then red terrain indicates within 100 feet or above your current position. But good peace of mind though when in mountainous terrain. Another feature is the ruler tool. This is a flight I was on last summer, but we're flying along and you can see some storm cells up ahead of us, and that's the view out the front window there to show the tops of the clouds up ahead of us. But what you can do is put 2 fingers on the map, and that will simultaneously display that ruler tool. And on that ruler, you'll be able to see some basic information, and most importantly in this case is a distance. So in this situation, I measured that storm cell is about 31 miles away from our current position. But you can also use that. As you can see, it has a magnetic course information on there that tells you the bearing to that storm cell or whatever the object might be. And you can help determine a vector heading around that, or how many degrees you might need to turn left or right to get around some weather. This is another feature that's relatively new in the last, I want to say, 3 months or so. For those that have the Pro level subscription, you can overlay approach charts and taxiway diagrams directly on your moving map. In this case, we're showing a wide variety of examples here at different airports, but great situational awareness that you can see right where the approach, final approach path is, the initial approach waypoints, relative to your current flight plan as you approach that airport. And as you can see in the middle example, it allows you to also turn on other overlays from the maps page. In that example, things like hazard overlays or hazard awareness that shows the relative terrain heights. And then on the far right image, we can show weather radar. So along with your flight plan, your approach chart, your sectional, you've also got weather information. If you're flying with a traffic receiver, you could also have traffic displayed on all these charts simultaneously as well. So really a lot of information there on one display, a very powerful tool in flight. This one works with all versions of ForeFlight, not just the Pro level. It has the ability to, after you land, automatically display the taxiway diagram. So as you come to an airport and are decelerating on the runway, if you have this auto show taxi feature enabled, it will automatically take over the screen and show your taxiway diagram. So one less heads down step you have to accomplish as you land and roll out and get taxi clearance instructions from the controller. And just to verify to make sure that setting is turned on, you go to the More tab in the bottom right, then select Settings, and then scroll down and you'll see an option for Auto Show Taxi. So that's our basic kind of selection of tips there. We do have a ForeFlight training program available here at Sporty's, as we have done with many other avionics programs in the past. But 70 minutes of high definition video, all in-depth video tutorials on how to use all these different features in the application. Also includes a pilot's guide and a review quiz to cover your information and review the information, but available for under $30 as either a dedicated iPad app or an online course. But recommend you check that out if you're looking to learn more about ForeFlight and all it can do. So next I'll bring up Garmin Pilot. And the timing of this is unique in that Garmin just released a new version of the application today, which has a lot of new features. Primarily is a new attitude indicator feature, as you can see there on the left side. And this works in conjunction with their brand new Garmin GDL 39, and then the model number of this one is called 39-3D, which adds an attitude and heading sensor system. So just like some of the other receivers out there, you can now use the Garmin GPS, ADS-B receiver, and also show your aircraft attitude directly in the app. So you've got backup attitude instruments to fly along with. Like ForeFlight, Garmin does sectionals, does all your approach charts, flight planning, has a very powerful traffic display that you can use with ADS-B receiver as well, as you can see in the picture there. And another feature they just added with this release today is Garmin Verb camera integration, which allows you to show a split screen of your moving map in the app and a real-time preview of what your camera is seeing. So a lot of functionality there in that application, especially if you're using it with some of their dedicated hardware. WingX Pro, another popular app. This one has really led the pack with features and new features coming out first. They had synthetic vision first, things like terrain, obstacles. And one of their unique features is that split view, as you can see at the right there. So you can show an en route chart and an approach chart simultaneously. So a lot of different ways to customize the display in WingX for your flight. Of course, Jeppesen has a collection of applications. These are really popular with the airline pilots and those flying internationally. It's really the one app out there that you can get charts from the entire world for a price for your iPad. En route charts and terminal procedures available in their applications. But all these do require a separate Jeppesen subscription. Now the good thing is if you're already paying for one, the JetView type software, you can get this for your iPad, I believe at no additional charge. Flightplan.com is a very popular flight planning website, especially in the business aviation community, to accurately plan flights at high altitudes and really a wide variety of altitudes, taking into consideration winds and other factors. But they also have a free app available that can display navigation logs, your weather briefings from the website, but also shows VFR and IFR charts and Canadian, Mexican, and Caribbean charts, all for free. Not as really fully featured or functional, in my opinion, as the other ones, ForeFlight and Garmin, but it's a good backup app to have, maybe if you want to have it on there as an alternative. But if you are using flightplan.com, it's a good app to have to display your flight plans. You can download them right from the flightplan.com website and store your navigation logs right there in that app. 3 more I'll point out, just if you're in the market for an app, just to add to your thought process, is AOPA FlyQ, Anywhere Map, and then the Bendix King My Wingman application. And we've done a really good detailed comparison on all these apps in a comparison guide, basically a matrix you can view on iPadPilotNews.com. So if you are still determining which app is best for you, I would recommend checking that out on our website. A couple points here when you are deciding. All of these are subscription-based, meaning that you're going to pay roughly $75 to $100 per year for a base level subscription. And then most of them have typically a premium or a pro level subscription on top of that for another $75 a year. That adds things like geo-referenced approach charts, some of the higher end terrain features and other things. But apps like ForeFlight, Garmin, you can start out for only $75 and get all the important sectional and charting features right away. They also offer free trials, as I mentioned earlier, so you can download these applications and typically use all the features for 30 days to try them out, to end flight, see how they work for you. And my thing to pay attention to is the ease of use and the functionality of the app. How does it work for you? Is it something that you can adapt to using in the airplane? They all offer the same core features at the end of the day. But which one can you feel yourself using during instrument approaches or high pressure situations when you need to access data quickly? And to me, that's one of the most important things to think about. Look at customer support. All these apps have really good customer support, but it doesn't take long to look online and read reviews of which ones excel at this better than others. A couple other weather apps I like. Sometimes you just want to see a quick radar picture or maybe a 10-day forecast. And these are really, really neat, colorful iPad apps that you can look at from AccuWeather, WSI, of course, a big aviation weather supplier. And then for just a dedicated radar app, I think MyRadar does a really good job for that. One more I'll point out, this app costs between $75 and $100. It's a little more expensive, but a very powerful app. It's called Xavion, and it provides a synthetic vision display for your iPad, especially if you use it with an AHRS type system that can sense attitude and heading. But its really big selling point is it can help you project a glide angle in the event of an engine failure, and it can learn your aircraft to present that information to get you on the ground to the nearest airport. So that's been a real popular app. I've heard really good things about it. Just check that one out as well, called Xavion. And last is kind of a neat app for your iPhone or iPad. I think it works better on an iPhone, called Cloud Topper. And what this does is allows you to use the camera in your iPhone and hold it level, and you can see in flight whether or not your current flight path will clear the tops of the clouds. Kind of an electronic version, replacement for the old site level applications, or site level handheld devices. Okay, so let's move into some accessories. There's really 3 categories you want to consider when looking at iPad accessories, and that is backup power, in case you do want to have some kind of way to charge the iPad in flight if your power does get low. GPS or ADS-B accessories. If you don't buy the model with the built-in GPS, you can add that feature separately. And then mounting options. You've got a wide variety of options for GPS. The first one, and probably the simplest, is a plug-in model from Bad Elf that plugs into the bottom of your iPad. This one runs $99, and there's 2 versions. Again, we mentioned earlier, there's 2 different types of connectors on the iPad. So you have the 30-pin for the older style, and then a lightning version for the new style iPads. And then Bad Elf also makes a wireless Pro version that can connect to multiple devices and uses Bluetooth wireless to connect to your iPad and provide that GPS data. And then here's 3 more Bluetooth options. One from Garmin, the Garmin Glow, and then 2 models from Dual, the 150 and the 160. And when comparing the 150 and the 160 models, the one on the right, the newer version, can connect up to 5 iPads simultaneously. So something to consider if you have multiple pilots flying in the same cockpit. One thing to point out when using any of these GPS accessories though, whether it plugs into the bottom or is using the Bluetooth, is that you are going to increase the battery drain on the iPad. So it's going to go from, like I mentioned, 10 hours earlier is what Apple specifies for reading books or surfing the internet. It's going to drop down to roughly 4 or 6 hours of battery life when using the iPad as a moving map navigator with one of these GPS products. Another higher tech, really neat product you can add to your iPad that really adds some advanced capability is an ADS-B receiver. ADS-B is part of the next generation air traffic control system that I'm sure many of you heard all about. And many think of the requirement to have to equip our aircraft with advanced transponders to meet the requirement. But part of the system that's available now is that it broadcasts a free weather information service out to pilots over the ground-based network. And that's all available right now over the majority of the United States. And as part of this, you can pick up things like NEXRAD radar, METARs and TAFs, and other text weather products all for free over this ADS-B system. So one of the products available to pick up this information and display it on your iPad and ForeFlight is called Stratus, a product built just for ForeFlight. It costs $899, has no wires, has a built-in 8-hour battery, so it's going to last longer than your iPad as far as the battery is concerned. But picks up all this data and sends it wirelessly to your iPad via Wi-Fi. You're going to get things like regional and national radar, METARs and TAFs, winds aloft, airmets, SIGMETs, NOTAMs, TFRs, PIREPs, and some more weather products as well. All the weather you see on your iPad in flight is accessed the same way as you would on the ground. So there's really nothing else to learn when using this product. It all just works very seamlessly in flight. Probably the biggest feature that pilots are looking for is that radar imagery. Now keep in mind, just like XM weather or any data link weather product, there is a delay in there. So it's not real-time radar, but it's only 5 to 10 minutes old. So great for making those long-term strategic decisions in flight. You're not going to circumvent nearby cells within miles or close navigation, but you're going to be able to pick routes down the road to keep you clear of that weather in flight. So great tool. And the best thing about all this is there's no subscription fee. This is all part of the government's weather system, so that's a free broadcast. Once you own the hardware, there's nothing else to pay for to continue to get this weather information. Part of the ADS-B system in Next Gen is that it also picks up traffic. So when using the system, you're going to get a limited traffic display as well. Mainly right now, you're going to get other aircraft that have ADS-B out transponders, and they're going to show up in your ForeFlight application, as you can see in the display there. And as icing on the cake, the Stratus also has a built-in attitude heading reference system known as AHRS. And this will allow you to display a backup attitude and heading information on your iPad. This uses a separate application called the free Stratus Horizon app, but you'll get that glass cockpit style moving map display there with a really smooth and easy to fly attitude indication. So a great backup system for your aircraft. Garmin has a very similar product for its Garmin Pilot application called the Garmin GDL39. Very similar feature set. And as I mentioned, really within the last couple hours, they just announced the new GDL39 3D, which is the next generation version of this product that adds that AHRS capability as well. So in the Garmin Pilot application, you're going to see that backup attitude display as you do there in the bottom right. And if you're flying with some of the other applications, WingX Pro, AOPA FlyQ, or Bendix Kink My Wingman, you have a couple options there in the dual XGPS 170 as an ADS-B receiver, or the SageTech Clarity, another option for those applications. And the SageTech Clarity also has the option to add the attitude and heading reference system. The AHRS for a backup attitude display. Okay, so next consideration is a mounting option. Really, two main options are the Kneeboard or the RAM mounting system, where you actually affix it to your aircraft. These are our popular Kneeboard options here. Recommend checking out our website We've got a wide variety of different kneeboard options, ranging from some that are under $20 to get you started. So a real cost-effective way to get the iPad mounted in the airplane. And then the other popular way, as I mentioned, is the RAM mounting system, where the iPad affixes into a cradle and then uses one of 3 different connecting points, a yoke mount, a glare shield mount, or the suction mount, which is probably the most popular to affix to your aircraft. So considering and based on whether you're renting the aircraft or own it, a wide variety of options there. And with these RAM cradles and the kneeboards, make sure you pay attention. There's options for the full-size iPad or for the mini. So there's specific sizes for both products. Now the default RAM cradles form-fit the iPad, either the 7 or 10-inch models. So if you have a case on it, they're not going to fit. We do have a spring-loaded cradle option that will hold the iPad and allow you to keep a case on it, so it doesn't have to be tight of a form fit around the iPad. And you can leave the case on and still mount it with one of the RAM cradles. And that'll also support Android tablets or other non-iPad tablets if you are interested in that as well. And as far as the battery backup or power backup, you really have 2 options. The best one on the right there, if you have a cigarette lighter in your aircraft, is to use a USB cigarette lighter adapter. And a couple things to pay attention to. They're not all created equal. The first one is to make sure it has that 2 amp charging spec, especially for the full-size iPad. It does use a higher amp draw to charge more quickly. So make sure that cigarette lighter is the 2 amp charging spec. And also make sure it meets the 12 to 28 volt gamut, especially if you're using it in an aircraft with a 28 volt cigarette lighter. Some of the cheap ones online may or may not meet that specification, but all of the versions at Sporty's website do meet that. If you don't have a cigarette lighter or just want to use a battery backup, the iSound battery backup there for under $100 can increase your battery life by up to 150%. Includes 5 USB ports, so you can plug in multiple devices simultaneously. But a great resource for, again, for under $100 to keep your iPad charged and maintain that peace of mind that your iPad is going to be there for your flight. Okay, last topic we're going to discuss is the iPad Preflight. I think a very practical takeaway from this presentation and something you should be completing on every flight when flying with the iPad. So number one, and most of these are obvious steps, but it's a routine you want to get yourself into when using the iPad. So write this down. Again, this presentation will be available online as a video. And then also on iPad Pilot News, we have all these checklist items here in an article to check that out as well. So number one, obviously common sense, start every flight with the battery at 100% to maximize the amount of power available. As I've mentioned before, the normal use of the iPad will give 8 to 10 hours, but when you're using it with a wireless GPS accessory and an app like ForeFlight, expect more along the lines of 4 to 6 hours of use. Make sure to use the included charger. The full-size iPad includes the 2 amp charger, and you'll read that right on the power brick that comes with it. If you do have the iPad mini, that uses a standard 1 amp iPhone charger. So any USB charger will work with that one. But for those with the iPad Air or the full-size iPad, make sure to use the 2 amp charger to get the maximum efficiency and charge the fastest amount of time. Now, you can use any charger with any of these products. You're not going to do any damage. It's just it's going to take a longer time to charge the full-size iPad if you were to use the iPhone charger. It takes about 4 to 6 hours to charge a fully drained battery. And it's okay to leave it plugged in when you're not using it, so don't feel bad about just leaving it plugged in the home or office in between flights just to make sure it's always available for you. Next step is to make sure your apps are up to date. Not only here, you're going to get the latest feature sets and improvements to the application, but you're also checking to make sure that you have the latest version in terms of bug fixes or other problems that may have been in the app. So you want to make sure you have the most stable version before flight. Now, after you install any update, and this is again a reason why I think it's important to do the updates yourself and not rely on the automatic app update feature in the iPad. But run the application at least once just to make sure that everything's working properly and that all your aviation data is still there. It's rare for an update to cause any problems, but you don't want to find out in the airplane. Do it on the ground in your living room or your office just to make sure that everything is still working properly. Next thing is to verify that all your databases are up to date. These are updated every 28 days, available in ForeFlight. And as I mentioned earlier, ForeFlight makes all this data available about 4 or 5 days in advance. So that Sunday or Monday, before the new data goes into effect later that week on that Thursday, you'll see all that data available to be able to be downloaded in the download section of the ForeFlight application. And if you have the room for it, go ahead and download it then. The app, like I said, will store 2 sets of data, both the current and the next revision, and then automatically switch over at the appropriate time. So there's no work on your part as far as making sure that you're reading the most accurate data and the most current data. And every time I go in there to check that and update my data, I also verify that all the states and regions are selected for the trip and any possible nearby states in case a diversion would be necessary. Don't forget to also check the databases on your phone if you're using that for a backup or any secondary iPads as well. I like to go into the airports page and make the airports that I'm taking off from or heading to the favorite. And the way you do that when viewing an airport on the page is to press that star button at the top left of the screen. And that will then appear in the favorite section in the left side over there under the double star symbol as your favorite airports, allowing you to access those quickly in flight. I like to load the route ahead of time on the ground. Again, saving anytime you can save ahead of time while pre-flighting and not in the airplane with the engine running really makes the iPad more valuable and less heads down time in the cockpit while you're getting things going and starting up. The IFR plates can be organized into binders, which is a section in the plate section of the app. So before each trip, I like to go in and organize each one of those plates for the departures, taxi diagrams, and approach charts for the airports that I'll be heading to. Okay, so this is one of the important parts of the pre-flight, and that is setting up the wireless radios properly based on what accessory you are using. And this is what's going to help you maximize the battery life and reduce the potential for GPS interference. So we're going to go through about 4 different scenarios here based on what kind of accessory or GPS you're using. So the first example is the iPad with the LTE or the wireless connectivity option that has the built-in internal GPS. Now the way you want to pre-flight this is to leave the airplane mode off, but then go in and turn off Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and cellular data individually. The reason you don't want to use the airplane mode to disable all those radios is because airplane mode also disables the internal GPS on the iPad. So if you do have that model and for some reason can't figure out why the GPS isn't functioning, it's probably because the airplane mode is turned on. But like I said, you want to go in and turn those other radios off manually. If you're using the plug-in iPad Bad Elf dongle with the iPad, one step here, very simple, turn the airplane mode on, which will disable all the wireless radios, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cellular data. If you have the option with the GPS built into it, that's going to disable the internal GPS as well. In this case, it'll use the more accurate plug-in GPS dongle that you're going to plug into it. And the iPad will always use the more accurate GPS source. So you don't have to worry about picking one versus the other. You'll get the most accurate signal when using those at the same time. If you're using a dedicated Bluetooth GPS like that from Dual, your step here is to turn airplane mode on, which will turn off all the wireless radios, but then go back in manually and turn Bluetooth back on, which will then allow you to connect to that Dual Bluetooth GPS. And then finally, if you're using a product like the Stratus-AHRS weather receiver, which uses Wi-Fi, your steps here are to turn airplane mode on and then go back in manually and turn Wi-Fi on to allow that connection. With iOS 7, again mentioned earlier, you have that control panel option, which you access from sliding up from the bottom of the screen. And this is where you can access all your airplane mode and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth settings very quickly. You don't have to go into your settings application. And the nice thing here is you can access that right from an app also. You don't have to go to the home screen or another spot in the iPad to access this. So a real quick way to configure those ahead of time. And it's also a spot in that lower right-hand corner where you can lower the screen brightness. And that's a great tip for maximizing battery life. If you can even lower that screen brightness down by 20 or 25%, you might get an extra hour or so of battery life. So try to remember that even if you are in bright conditions, if you can still view it with the screen brightness down a little bit, you're really going to get a better battery life out of the product. And also clean the screen ahead of time, either with microfiber cloth or some kind of cotton cloth. That's going to allow you to lower the screen brightness down as well a little bit more, again, to help you keep the battery running longer throughout your flight. Okay, back to wrap up here, again, iPad Pilot News, the website I'd recommend to check out. Again, more information on everything I discussed here today in article format. It's got a great search function, so you can search for all kinds of different tips and app reviews and things. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Eric.